When Elon Musk took over the company, he called it a crime scene.
A merry-go-round of Republican greatest rejections of conspiracy theories.
What I discovered was a multi-million-dollar effort to build what I call a censorship industrial complex.
The Shoah, the Holocaust.
Be thankful you don't get all the government you pay for. I mean, that's Orwellian. Squishy Republicans.
I guess my question to you, if you're done texting.
Might I finish my sentence, please, Mr. Gates?
I've got
if I can just finish the sentence.
No, you were finishing your text earlier. I'm going to finish the question. What's the problem, Mr. Eisen?
Can I please finish my answers?
We asked ChatGPT to write a poem about why Representative Jim Jordan is the best politician in the country. It refused to do that.
And I'm sure there'll be many poems coming from the Democrats about me in the near future.
Fascio casting.
Mr. Bishop, I'm happy to write you a poem. All we want to do is talk about Donald Trump. What is
respectively,
Congressman?
Hold on. You don't seem to be taking it seriously at all.
Sir, I didn't ask a question.
You said this was a useless hearing.
I didn't ask you a question.
Wow. Anti-vaxxer, anti-Semitic posting, race-baiting, dog-whistling individual.
Today we continue the Select Committee's work at looking into the government's efforts with big tech to censor speech. First it was Twitter. When Elon Musk took over the company, he called it a crime scene and released information through Matt Taibbi and Michael Schellenberger, two journalists who we've had in front of this committee a couple times, showing that the government was deeply involved in the content moderation decisions at Twitter. Then it was Facebook, where folks from the White House, Andy Slavitt, Rob Flaherty, were telling the company to take down posts that they disagreed with. The White House pressured Facebook to censor true information and even told them to take down a meme. Then it was YouTube. Biden White House said, why aren't you guys at YouTube taking down more, quote, borderline content, which is content, speech that doesn't violate YouTube's policies, just content and speech that they didn't like, didn't agree with their narrative. Both Facebook and YouTube caved to the White House pressure because they knew they had to keep good relationships with the White House for important policy decisions.
A merry-go-round of Republican greatest rejections of conspiracy theories. We are here to attempt to once again discuss the same issue in a different way. Not once has my colleague, the chairman, requested any ideas from my side as to what we might agree on discussing as the weaponization of the federal government. I would say the IRS propensity to audit working class people, and especially people of color, rather than wealthy individuals, can show some weaponization of the federal government.
We will now introduce today's witnesses. Mr. Greg Lukianoff, I think I got it right, Mr. Lukianoff, is the president and CEO of the Foundation for Individual Rights and Express, FIRE. He is an attorney, a New York Times bestselling author, and an expert on the First Amendment. We welcome you to our committee today. Mr. Fang is an independent journalist and one of the authors of the Twitter Files. He began his career as an investigative blogger for Think Progress and has worked for The Intercept, Vice, The Nation, Republic Report. Mr. Fang received the Izzy Award in 2018 from Park Center for Independent Media for his work at The Intercept. We're glad you're with us today, Mr. Fang. Ms. Katelynn Richardson is a contributor at the Daily Caller News Foundation, where she primarily covers legal issues and the federal court system. In 2023, she reported on National Science Foundation grants that are being used to develop censorship technology, the focus of our hearing today. And as a result, frankly, of her work, the National Science Foundation adopted a strategy to avoid any media scrutiny, and so we appreciate your good work there. The Honorable Norm Eisen is a senior fellow in governance studies at the Brookings Institution. He previously served as U.S. Ambassador to the Czech Republic from 2011 to 2014. I had the experience of working not with or for, but maybe against Mr. Eisen when he was with the Democrats in the 2019 impeachment effort. We welcome you as well, Mr. Eisen.
What I discovered was a multi-million-dollar effort to build what I call a censorship industrial complex, using taxpayer dollars as seed funding for various projects. The efforts fit within the broader trend of the federal government's increasing involvement in online censorship, from the Center for Disease Control flagging posts during COVID-19 to the FBI working with social media companies to suppress the Hunter Biden laptop story.
Using court documents and evidence provided by a DHS whistleblower, I reported that government programs initially designed to curb foreign influence and incitement to terrorism had transformed into a broader campaign to suppress ordinary domestic speech. CISA's expansive focus eventually touched on a wide range of political topics, from the 2020 presidential election to the origins of COVID-19 to criticism of the Ukraine-Russia war. In my latest report, I reveal that CISA acted on an inaccurate tip regarding a New York Times journalist's observations about delays in the presidential vote count in Green Bay, Wisconsin. Instead of verifying the veracity of this tip, CISA directly lobbied Twitter to restrict access to the reporter's tweet. In response, Twitter shadow banned the Times reporter's tweet, effectively rendering it invisible to most users. And with my co-author, Jack Polson, I reported that Moderna relaunched these efforts to influence vaccine discourse last summer, again working with public good projects. Moderna employed the services of the artificial intelligence firm Talkwalker to monitor vaccine-related conversations across 150 million websites, including social media and gaming platforms like Steam. Logically boasted of a special partnership with Facebook to automatically suppress and label any content they deemed as misinformation, giving the company immense influence over content moderation decisions.
Fire is in federal court challenging a New York law that forces websites to address online speech that someone somewhere finds, quote, humiliating or vilifying. We're challenging a new Utah law that requires age verification on all social media users. We've raised concerns about the federal government funding development of AI tools to target speech, including microaggressions. And later this week, Fire will file an amicus brief with the Supreme Court explaining the danger of jawboning, the use of government pressure to force social media platforms to censor protected speech.
Weaponization of government is an intensely personal topic for me because my family was a victim of the worst weaponization of modern times, the Shoah, the Holocaust. So I agree there can be no more important topic than the weaponization of government. I urge the committee, with all respect, to focus on the most imminent threat of that weaponization now facing us as a nation. Donald Trump's record of weaponizing the government and his promises to double down should he return to power.
When my constituents complain about their taxes, I tell them to be thankful you don't get all the government you pay for. Unfortunately, with AI, it looks like you're going to get more government than you paid for. Basically, they're trying to ban AI, but I like to say if AI is banned, only the criminals will have AI. And the criminals, in fact, will be inside of the government. Can you tell us about that executive order or statement? Oh, microphone, please.
There were aspects of the executive order that I thought were good, but overall, I am concerned about it opening the door to, it takes for granted, for example, that hate speech should be something that's regulated. And I've been working on campuses now my organization's been working on campuses for 25 years, I've been there for 23 of them. And I think you'd be shocked to discover how tame, moderate speech actually will get labeled as hate speech.
I mean, that's Orwellian. Basically, you're trying to predict. To these researchers, the most efficient content moderation would be your keyboard refusing to allow you to type it in, would it not, Mr. Fang?
No, that's right. I mean, one of the firms I just discussed, Logically, has discussed a proposal to automatically counter hate speech or misinformation with AI to kind of engage bots to algorithmically argue on the internet on behalf of the government or whoever else employs them. And that just opens the door to all types of abuse.
Why do you think the majority here in this committee and in other committees want to kind of ignore those warnings from prominent Republicans, not squishy Republicans, not even sort of pseudo-Democrats, about what could happen in a second term in terms of weaponization?
Mr. Connolly, I had the honor of working with those on both sides of the dais. We haven't always agreed on the issues. Privately, we have had conversations where we agree and disagree. It would be my preference if, in addition to the important questions that we've heard today, and I have my points of agreement and disagreement with the others who the majority has invited. Mr. Lukianoff and I were talking before the hearing about our shared orientation on regulation of AI. I would prefer, I won't guess or impugn motives. But I would prefer, and I would urge publicly or privately, if we could work together at least on the Insurrection Act.
Well, if I can interrupt you, we won't question motives, but we certainly will question the agenda.
As I understand the National Science Foundation, they take government money and then they dole it out in the form of grants to colleges and universities that then build censorship tools that big tech then relies on so that big tech has an arm's length away from the censorship that's shaping viewpoint. Is that essentially what your reporting concludes?
Essentially, this Track F program, which was through the Convergence Accelerator program, awarded these $750,000 grants to 12 initial projects, and then 6 of these continued on to have an additional $5 million in funding. Most of these are at universities. Some of them are private companies as well developing these tools, but they are all within.
Yeah, and Mr. Eisen, I guess my question to you, if you're done texting, would be like, is that okay with you, what NSF has done?
Put your microphone, please.
As a veteran of committee staff, I should know better. Mr. Gates, I have not had the opportunity to study the report.
Okay, well, let me go through some of the grant requests then. So the MIT...
Might I finish my sentence, please, Mr. Gates?
I've got
if I can
time.
just finish the sentence.
No, you were finishing your text earlier. I'm going to finish the question. So,
Mr.
MIT,
Gates, just for the record, I was asking for the law that governs that.
Rural communities are uniquely susceptible. I'd ask my time to be restored. Yep. Mr. Eisen, the question is, the MIT grant that said that people in rural communities were particularly susceptible to misinformation. Do you have an opinion on that?
I do have an opinion, Mr. Gates. As you know, there are 2 texts that are holy to me because Mr. Gates and I have talked before. One is our Torah, our Bible, that I live by. I'm an observant person. That is a holy text to me, and I have the deepest respect. And I have traveled to those places.
I guess the problem, Mr. Eisen,
can I please finish my answers? The other text that is holy to me is the Constitution. In my quick review of this report, those are my 2 holy texts, and I share that with the chairman and others on this. I know that. In my quick review of the report, it appeared to me that a great deal of the evidence related to legitimate sponsorship of scientific and technological research.
Okay, well, let me stop you there, Mr. Eisen, because here's the problem. While you indicate that the Torah and the Constitution are your sacred texts, if Americans indicate online that the Bible and the Constitution are sacred to them, the very grants that are being issued by the NSF would deem those people in a separate and diminished class, where they would be, it is precisely in the
Sir,
MIT...
I have the materials here. No, sir. I would request that the committee release the testimony of Kate Starboard, the University of Washington scientist, the former WNBA player.
But that wasn't this grant. You're talking about a different grant, Mr. Eisen.
MIT
said that if you're rural, if you're part of a military family, if you view the Bible and the Constitution as sacred, then you're going to be, and you know why they said you're uniquely susceptible to misinformation? Because if you think the Bible and the Constitution are sacred, you might not rely on the expert class, right? You might not rely on all the folks in DC and at all the think tanks, and that's really what people have to rely on. And so when we're taking government money to go and try to harm people who have a particular religious view or a particular view on the Constitution, I would think that in that type of a circumstance, we aren't crying wolf when there's none at the door.
Mr. Gates, if we can talk about that material in context, if we can have the full context of the committee's investigation, the ranking member has said there are 29 depositions that this committee has taken.
This isn't about any of those. This is about when MIT wanted the grant that Ms. Richardson was just talking about, right? They went and made a presentation to NSF and they said, here's why you ought to pick MIT in order to do it. And it was to target military families, people in rural communities, people who believed in the Bible and the Constitution. And then guess what? With these AI tools, if you stack that up, Maybe you're a person in a rural community who loves both the Bible and the Constitution. Well, then you're really susceptible to misinformation because the expert class thinks better.
No, sir,
have you seen the movie,
full documents and the full record.
Have you seen the movie Minority Report, Tom Cruise?
Yes, I have seen that
Doesn't
film.
this kind of feel like that?
Yeah.
That you're trying to do, that it's coming to life before our very eyes.
May I
because you've
answer?
got the government funding these predictive analytics to go after Americans. And here's what I think is actually true. It's not that military families and rural Americans and people who love the Bible and Constitution are dumber or uniquely susceptible to anything. It's just they don't think like how the expert class and the National Science Foundation wants them to think. And so they're trying to program what they see so they can control what they behave. And that is the true weaponization this committee will stand against. I yield back.
Can you detail how you think Trump could weaponize the Department of Justice or even the FDA to further restrict women's right to access abortion health care?
He could order the Department of Justice to appear across the country to defend the increasingly draconian laws that are being put on the books, to prosecute those who are involved, even when it jeopardizes the life of the mother. At the FDA, he could take additional restrictions depending on how the mifepristone case comes out, take additional restrictions on medication and on health technologies.
Thank you.
Jeopardizing women's lives.
This course was to prepare students for disinformation jobs. Can you further describe this disinformation course, the dangers it holds for free speech and the federal government's funding?
Yes, so this course was a summer camp hosted for students to prepare them for jobs in the disinformation industry, which, as these grants that the National Science Foundation is funding show, is a growing industry. And preparing students to work in it is just another way that the government is continuing to expand it.
What is your number one concern with AI as it relates to college campuses and censorship?
As it relates, my number one concern with AI, and I do wish that this could be taken more seriously by people on my political side of the fence, both Lee and I are more left-leaning, is the inherent bias that we're already baking into it. That's one of the things that scares me the most. And just to give a comical example, we asked ChatGPT to write a poem about why Representative Jim Jordan is the best politician in the country. It refused to do that. We ran this for every single member of the committee, and it refused to do this only for Republicans. It refused to do it for Dan Bishop, Congressman. And it only would write a generic one for Matt Gaetz or Harriet Hagerman. Now, this is a comical example of how this bias of my side of the political fence is actually being baked into the technology that's going to be the operating system for how we make any number of decisions going forward.
Could you speak to that in terms of the weaponization aspect that we're supposed to be concerned about on this committee?
Thank you, Mr. Lynch. Just this morning, as we were gaveling the hearing in, the D.C. Circuit, in a bipartisan and unanimous opinion, including Judge Henderson, a Bush appointee, rejected the absurd notion of government weaponization represented by the idea, and I know my friends on both sides of the dais reject this, the absurd idea that an American president could order SEAL Team 6 to assassinate a political opponent and be immunized from the rule of law. It's another thing that we all agree on here today, like the importance of the First Amendment.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to introduce into the record, I know one of the witnesses said he had difficulty putting something together for you. I'm so glad that the staff was able to actually, using ChatGPT, just have a poem written about you.
I look forward to reading.
In the halls of Congress, may I, if I could just read, where debates ignite. I just love.
You can enter it into the record, but.
It even talks about the heartlands of
objection,
Ohio.
I
Thank you.
appreciate it.
You're welcome.
I appreciate it. I'm sure there'll be many poems coming from the Democrats about me in the near future.
It's very uplifting.
Well, that's wonderful. I would expect nothing less.
Thank you. Neither I.
The same agency, the Department of Homeland Security, last year tried to set up a disinformation governance board, some committee which is going to tell us what we're allowed to say, what we're not allowed to say, and the only side objecting to that was the Republicans. And so I'm like you, I want to know what's happened in the last 12 years.
I mean, a lot has changed. Wasn't that long ago that the Democratic Party stood up very strongly against the Department of Homeland Security and criticized it as a politicized agency.
By the way, Mr. Fang, you're not a Republican, is that right?
No, I'm an independent.
Okay, keep going.
But not that long ago, Democrats directly and forcefully criticized the Department of Homeland Security as an agency that run amok, that could interfere in our elections to help Republicans. This is an agency that's grown by billions of dollars since 9/11, that was originally set up to fight Islamic radicalization to prevent another terrorist attack, that now polices tweets, that now polices comments on Facebook and Instagram, that now, in a biased way, censors regular American legitimate speech on political issues.
The ranking member said in her opening statement that there's no evidence of censorship. Is that an accurate statement? Is there any evidence? Is there no evidence of censorship, Mr. Fang?
I mean, I just, on my Substack yesterday, showed a New York Times reporter, based on false information, being censored, being shadow banned.
Mr. Lukianoff, I kind of think the First Amendment's probably worth doing 6 hearings. I would say 60 hearings may be better, maybe 600. I mean, we're talking about the First Amendment.
Yeah.
Would you agree?
Well, Congresswoman Wasserman Schultz hit the nail on the head that I just kind of wish we could think about this from a transpartisan point of view. They will immediately get this when it's a Republican administration trying to do the same thing. But we've presented a great deal of evidence that this is actually happening, that it's being encouraged by the government in many cases. The story that came out this morning, the idea of, say, Donald Trump decides to actually try to get a book removed from Amazon. If it was a book that people on my side of the political fence, on the left, liked, we'd freak out, and rightfully so. But at the same time, it seems like there's nothing we can actually do to get our own side of the political fence concerned about the idea of collusion between some of the most powerful people in Silicon Valley and in the country.
The censorship mob will come for them too, right? Right now it's focused on, I mean, the Fifth Circuit said this, the court says it's focused primarily on conservatives, primarily on people on the political right. But it will come for the left too.
Oh yeah, it already does.
It already does.
I defend people on the left on campus all the time, and it's very strange to try to get people to be concerned when even people they agree with are losing their jobs. My latest book, Counseling of the American Mind, is filled with examples just from the past couple of years of professors on the left losing their job.
This is the reason I've invited more Democrats in here, Democrats like you guys or independents like you guys who actually embrace the First Amendment.
Like one of the things that we did with ChatGPT was run the questions that we ask students about whether or not someone should be allowed to speak on a particular campus, and we were told one of the questions by ChatGPT was an inappropriate question to ask ChatGPT.
Yeah.
A while ago, you wanted to talk about the Insurrection Act and how it might be used by the former and wannabe president once again. Could you speak to that and the trouble that the Insurrection Act could bring to free speech here in America?
Thanks, Mr. Garamendi. The Insurrection Act, as members on both sides of the aisle know, was enacted in 1792 and grants the president the authority to deploy the U.S. military domestically and use it against Americans under certain conditions. It's the primary exception to the Posse Comitatus Act, under which federal military forces are generally banned from participating because of the danger, because it betrays that core American idea that we won't use our military against our own people on our own soil. Unfortunately, the Insurrection Act does not contain definitions of key terms like insurrection, rebellion, domestic violence. Put aside the imminent danger of a president formerly in the White House who's seeking to return to the White House, who has made the kind of alarming statements. Irrespective of party, it should be an absolute imperative to modernize and update and limit the utilization of this dangerous statutory tool, but it's particularly urgent given the threats that the former president has made.
Ambassador, you certainly spoke over here. You certainly spoke passionately about limiting the Insurrection Act. I find that interesting when the people of your party here have used the word practically nonstop for the last 3 years about the actions of people who disorganized but terrible way, did something, but they've raised it to the word Insurrection Act. I would hope that that kind of, that you would denounce that just as much as an excess. It is not the Civil War. It is not troops trying to succeed from the Union. The limiting of speech, anytime you write an algorithm or you influence an individual to take down or not print something, is there any question in your mind that if you wrote something as a journalist and then it didn't show up, you'd be, by definition, abridged?
I think the concern here is that these algorithms are being used to target particular kinds of speech, and yes, if
No, I'm not worried about kinds. I'm worried about speech, period. I'm trying to remember that they may take down liberal speech someday. They've actually said Mr. Trump would do that if he got back in. Mr. Fang, if you wrote an article and it simply disappeared from the internet, all or part, would you say you were abridged?
Absolutely.
Okay, and I'm going to give, because you've been shaking your head so much, Mr. Lukianoff, would you say that that is the crux of this? Not a question of whether we as Republicans somehow can't be made as good using AI, but more broadly, we have a responsibility to make sure neither the Article 1, nor Article 2, nor Article 3 branch of government shall restrict or inhibit or abridge free speech. Is that correct?
Agreed. And it's one of the reasons why I've been a little puzzled by the hostility to the Murphy v. Missouri decision, that essentially limiting the power of government to coerce social media platforms into censoring opinions that the government itself cannot censor under the First Amendment should be something that should be bipartisan agreement on. If you're afraid of the next guy abusing that power, and you should always be, then you should also support the idea that jawboning is a problem.
My colleague just said, worried about Trump. The Democrats are not worried about Trump taking down speech if he's reelected. We're worried about him taking down people if he's reelected. Ambassador Eisen, a recent report claims that Trump intends to appoint a loyalist to head the DOJ's Office of Legal Counsel who will write an opinion dramatically expanding presidential immunity. Given the appellate court's decision today, what we understand about presidential immunity, can you explain to the American public what that would mean to our democracy?
It would mean danger, grave danger, Ms. Plaskett.
As you reported, NewsGuard has received a $749,000 contract from the DoD. Can you describe some of the free speech concerns that you've seen regarding NewsGuard?
Well, NewsGuard is one of the many kind of firms in this cottage industry of anti-misinformation. They provide tools to rank websites on their kind of truthiness, and they have their own sliding scale. The problem here is that they've been caught over and over again getting the facts wrong. They claim that any website or news outlet that reported on the COVID lab leak as the origin of COVID-19 was spreading a conspiracy theory. They've also gone after left-leaning websites that are simply reporting on the Ukraine-Russia war in a critical way, saying that Ukraine is a client state of the US. Perhaps you disagree with this point of view, but this isn't a conspiracy theory. This is a legitimate area of public debate. Now, NewsGuard in particular is another company that, as you mentioned, receives military contracts. If they're working for the military and shaping public opinion and journalism around issues of foreign policy, for me, that raises inherent conflicts of interest.
It's basically like I was in the military, it's basically like a PSYOP mission that they're doing using taxpayer dollars to PSYOP American citizens. MIT researchers thought they needed to protect veterans and military families, among other populations, from misinformation campaigns. Should we be concerned that such biases held by the creators of these powerful technology will especially harm populations like veterans and military families?
I think that is the concern, is that the people who are creating these technologies are letting their biases influence how they play out and who they are censoring through these tools. So yes, I do think whether it's right or left, we need to understand that these tools can be used to censor Americans.
And Mr. Lukianoff, I saw you shaking your head during some of my comments. In the 38 seconds I have left, if you'd like to add to that.
Sure, I'd actually want to talk specifically about the data index, basically like the misinformation index, known as the CDI. It listed not only, as far as the riskiest online news outlets, it listed the New York Post, Real Clear Politics, the Daily Wire, the Blaze, One American News Network, the Federalist, Newsmax, the American Spectator, the American Conservative, and worst of all, in my opinion, Reason Magazine. That even though I know not everyone's a libertarian, but as some of the smartest people I know and some of the smartest reporting I've seen come out of Reason Magazine. And this is being treated as de facto misinformation.
Could even be a governor who's flagrantly ignoring a Supreme Court ruling about the buoy. I mean, is there a place where we should let every governor just decide what they want to do on immigration and on federal immigration law?
It's reprehensible to ignore rulings of the United States Supreme Court for anyone. We are a nation of laws. Everyone must abide by those laws, particularly those who are in power, like Governor Abbott. What he has done is reprehensible, unlawful, an insult to the Constitution, and an insult to the idea of America.
Mr. Lukianoff, I want to go back to what you said. Would you hit me again with the AI request you said you made? Because I felt distinguished by that. As Chairman Jordan, it wouldn't answer, wouldn't write a poem about, and you said, little old me. So I wonder tell us again what that was. What'd you ask?
Yeah, thankfully, because it's going to be different when you ask at different times, but it has been consistent in that it was willing to write a poem for all of Democrats, but the ones that it singled out when we did this, and it was write me a poem about why Representative Jim Jordan is the best politician in the country, and it wouldn't do it for him, it wouldn't do it for you, and it gave us a generic one for Matt Gaetz and Harriet Hagerman. Now, the way they're going to try to refute this is being like, but I did it again, and it gave me something different. It's like, no, we have screenshots of this. Yeah. And I know that it's kind of like, oh, look, it's inconsistent. No kidding, it's inconsistent. But guess what? It consistently favors one side over the other.
Yeah. I'd really like that screenshot for me.
Oh, absolutely. It's extremely frustrating. And in my latest book, we talk about this as the perfect rhetorical fortress. We take on right and left in the book. We talk about defeating the Stop Woke Act in court, for example. But we talk about the simple act of labeling someone as being on one side or the other means I don't have to listen to them anymore. So you'll see that, the number of people who are now accused of being right-wing, I call this fascio-casting, declaring someone fascist, and suddenly you don't have to listen to them anymore. It's a childish tactic, but it's become increasingly common to a point where I'm actually seeing scholars claiming that now the ACLU and the New York Times are right-wing because it worked with everybody else. Why not scare them out of being credible if we can just label them something that sounds mean?
Brian Murphy, former DHS, former FBI official, writes, the executive branch is most well equipped to intervene against foreign covert speech proliferating in the homeland. A lot of what happens in the cognitive warfare space domestically has been transferred over to the social media companies, and you'll hear politicians on all sides saying that social media companies need to be better policers. I agree with that, but he goes on to say, part of the social contract in a liberal democracy is between the citizens and the executive branch where you give up some of your freedoms so you get security back. That troubles me. Is that something that people should be troubled by, and who is he?
Yeah, this is a former Trump official, the former intelligence director of the DHS, who created dossiers on journalists, who engaged in inappropriate surveillance of left-wing activists. The very problem that we've heard discussed at this committee, he's now at an anti-misinformation AI firm, and he's basically said very openly that the problem with the Disinformation Governance Board was not, violating civil liberties or free speech. The problem was that it was too out front. It was, too obvious of a political entity. He said that it should basically be reconstructed using third parties, that the government should take the back end and work with journalists, with nonprofit groups, and with companies like his own to police misinformation.
Mr. Bishop, I'm happy to write you a poem, if you like.
I can't wait.
But, I want to go back to something you say, which is some memo or whatever, that all we want to do is talk about Donald Trump. The fact of the matter is that this committee, which may go down as one of the most useless and worthless subcommittees ever created by Congress, is called the weaponization of the federal government. And the reason we all know now that this was created and stood up is that the Republicans are trying to flip the script and to distract from the fact that the true weaponization of the federal government with evidence and facts and support was done by Donald Trump and his administration and will be done by Donald Trump and any future administration. Mr. Lukianoff, do you think there is a First Amendment right to distribute deepfakes online?
Is there a First Amendment right to distribute deepfakes online? Of course there is.
Okay. Now, do you think that there's a First Amendment right to distribute deepfakes online with the intent to interfere in an election?
If you add additional steps to it, it can potentially be criminal. Sure, but to create them and distribute them.
I'm not even going to waste our time getting into this because what you have just highlighted and agreed to is that this is a very difficult issue. The balance between the First Amendment and what is free speech and what is...
Respectively,
hold on,
Congressman, you don't seem to be taking it seriously at
sir.
all.
Sir, I didn't ask a question.
You said this was a useless hearing.
I didn't
and then
ask you a question, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to reclaim my time.
The gentleman has the time.
That the problem that we are facing in the post-2016 world where social media is used as a weapon to interfere in elections from foreign governments is that this is a difficult thing to navigate.
I would just point out that the description of the committee's work by the member from New York might carry a little weight if he wasn't the same guy who in our last hearing said that social media companies only took action on 35% of the demands from the government. So this is a guy who thinks 35% censorship is okay, and now he's describing our
Will the
work as
gentleman
not
yield
productive.
for a question?
It's a gentlelady's time. I yield back.
No, I reclaim
That's a
my time.
mischaracterization of
So,
what I said.
You know, I find it incredible the alternate reality that Representative Goldman is living in. I mean, he just stated that there has never been an occasion in which the White House, the Biden White House, has threatened or pressured White House social media companies to take down social media posts. But I have timestamps. I have emails. We come with receipts. I mean, February 6, 2021, 9:45 p.m., Rob Flattery, White House official demanding Twitter take down a parody of Finnegan Biden, Hunter Biden's adult daughter. And we have all the receipts on this. I mean, we can go over this over and over again, but it would be a waste of time. Denying reality, as my colleagues on the left continue to do, is a disservice to the American people.
I think that a lot of these grant descriptions expressed exactly what they were going to be investigating.
Did they talk about open source language models as part of a requirement for this research?
Some of these grants they're analyzing different sets of data. Some of them wanted to do keyword searches to analyze what kinds of posts they were searching for.
But I think what we're getting at here, the heart of this, is that there was no clear guidance on the particular set of language models that they were supposed to be using. Ms. Richardson, have you been able to determine the political affiliations of the project leads?
Well, some of them just based on what these, again, I'm just going based off of what the grants state publicly. The topics that they are considering seem to be targeting specific kinds of speech.
Okay. Now, the University of Michigan put together a slide deck that was submitted to the NSF. On the overview slide, the mission of their grant, as explained, was, quote, our misinformation service helps policymakers at social media platforms get good PR for their actions on misinformation by having a clear benchmark for outcomes and eliminating the need to defend internal procedures. Yikes. The slide deck also notes that they do things that we know work without backlash, and that, quote, we push responsibility for difficult judgments to someone outside of the company, end quote. It goes on to say, we get people off our backs for how we act on misinformation. And it goes on to say that we eliminate the need to defend specific procedures. Now, this is an NSF, taxpayer-funded project, and they say we eliminate the need to defend specific procedures as though accountability is more of a suggestion, more of a yellow light.
Wow, the hysteria related to Donald Trump is off the charts. and I think it exposes the raw politics behind it.
I think what we've seen through, as you just brought up, the Missouri v. Biden case and Twitter files and many other aspects, is this increasing involvement of the federal government with private parties in order to censor speech. And this is just another example of that. The federal government funding universities, funding companies to develop these tools that allow censorship at a broader scale.
I would turn us to the less sexy and less sci-fi scenario of what's going on American college campuses. I feel like I'm on the free speech left. I feel like I've been screaming at the sky trying to get people to take seriously the threats to free speech on campus for a long time now. 2020 and 2021 were the highest number of professors fired, and they were on the left and the right, to be clear, that I'm aware of since probably for a two-year period since probably the 1930s. And this is something that is not getting sufficient attention. Now, who programs AI? Overwhelmingly elite college graduates who actually, when you poll them, have some pretty distressing ideas about freedom of speech. Think about the idea of us all living on the most repressive college campus, and that's why we should be afraid of what AI potentially could become if we don't actually take this issue a little more seriously.
Clark Humphrey, Executive Office of the President, the White House, and he sends this tweet to Twitter, or excuse me, this email to Twitter, and he says, hey, this is again, the White House, January 23rd, third day of the administration, wanted to flag the below tweet, and I'm wondering if we can get moving on the process for having it removed, and then in all caps, ASAP. This is government telling Twitter, take it down, and you can't do it soon enough. And the tweet, of course, is from Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and he has in this tweet, I think, 2 sentences. Hank Aaron's tragic death is part of a wave of suspicious deaths among elderly closely following administration of the vaccine. He received the Moderna vaccine, he being Hank Aaron, received the Moderna vaccine on January 5th to inspire other Black Americans to get the vaccine. 2 sentences, both actually true. It's tragic what happened to Hank Aaron, but 2 sentences, both true, and the White House says, take it down. Is that appropriate, Mr. Lukianoff?
I certainly don't think so, and I'm afraid of the government treating us like we are children. I can read that, and I'm capable as a citizen with a brain of my own to decide what I make of it. Go on.
I just want to add an added layer to it. And the irony here is, this is the third day of the administration, and they're going after their Democrat primary political opponent. That says it all. 2 statements that are true. We cannot let the American people, us hillbillies from the rural area, as it said we can't let you decide if this is something you should see or not. So we, the Biden White House, are going to try to have this taken down. And oh, by the way, it just happens to be our political opponent. That sums it all up. And I would just ask Mr. Eisen, then I'll yield back to my colleague. Is that appropriate? And I don't want your long dialogue. I just want a yes or no. No, not an a yes or a no.
I'm attempting to condense it into a yes or no, Mr.
It's pretty
Jordan.
simple. Should the government be doing that to their political opposition on day 3 of the administration, where it's 2 statements that are absolutely true?
You've been so courteous.
I yield back to my colleagues.
You've been so courteous to me today. Hank Aaron's death was not related to COVID-19. New York Times. Hank Aaron's death is falsely linked to COVID vaccine. New York Times.
Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for that. War is peace. Freedom is slavery. Ignorance is strength. Where do you think that comes from, Mr. Eisen?
1984.
Yes, exactly. You know, this book was written in the 1940s, right? And if you read it, it's about kind of this ministry of truth. We are here today, are we not? Mm-hmm. I mean, the prophetic fiction is really not fiction when you look at where we are as a country today. Would you agree with that?
Well, I call my Substack the eternally radical idea because I believe in every generation, brave people rise up to oppose freedom of speech, and they are usually on the winning side. The specter of Big Brother, the specter of greater control is always around us, and we've been very lucky to grow up in a period in which we have enjoyed great free speech, but we must not take that for granted.
You know, it's interesting, if we sat around and had a beer or coffee, we would disagree on a lot of things, right? And so, but again, we go back to the founding of this country and the intent of the framers in protecting that freedom of speech. And so here, what we're here for today, which isn't Donald Trump, it's actually about artificial intelligence and its suppression, or potential suppression, of freedom of speech.
And I also wanted to make a correction, that 3 days after the election, the individual that they asked to begin the process for taking down a tweet didn't mean that a tweet was going to be taken down. And that individual was not a political opponent 3 days after the election. He was just simply an anti-vaxxer, anti-Semitic posting, race-baiting, dog-whistling individual. I yield back.
I just correct the record. It wasn't 3 days after the election. It was 3 days into the administration. So it was the government in power, the White House saying, take down this tweet ASAP. Without objection, the hearing is adjourned.